Welcome to the Ketogeek podcast. We live in the information age, and we are here to help you sift through processed information and find innovative solutions that work. Let's do this. Greetings, everybody. Welcome back to the Ketogeek podcast. My name is Fahad, and I will be solo hosting this show today. Normally, I'm joined by Corey, who is our alchemist. That's the nickname we give him. But today he is extremely busy, so I will have to man the helm myself. So life is good, guys and gals. We are extremely busy and extremely blessed to have you guys on our show once again. This topic that we're going to talk today about is going to be ridiculous. I was blown away by this show. So strap on your bootstraps and get excited because we're going to learn a lot of stuff. We're going to go beyond the fear-mongering and craziness that you see online and talk hardcore science, numbers, facts, and sort this whole mess out. Plastics. Such a huge controversial topic. I mean, we covered GMOs and all that kind of stuff, but this one, it's just in a whole league of its own. So let's find out what's up with all the plastics, right? But before we get into that show, let's talk about Ketogeek. What exactly is Ketogeek? Well, I'm glad I asked myself. Ketogeek is a food business that makes kick-ass food products. We take the latest and greatest science we can find from various domains ranging from nutrition, health, sustainability, sciences, different kinds of places, and converge onto a product, apply it into our product, which we call the energy pods. Now, we're not just limited to the energy pods. We've started working on some interesting new designs and prototypes and hardware that over time we're going to expose to everybody else. One of them, of course, is our display with that cool NFC chip and the magnetism in there. But I'm getting sidetracked. In a nutshell, we make kick-ass stuff. And the energy pods is our cornerstone feature for Ketogeek. Now, you may be curious, what is energy pods? Energy pods is basically exactly what I said just a minute ago. These are compact, 2-ounce, shelf-stable, tastiest food product in the world, and they contain a lot of nutrients, they contain a lot of energy, and they come in a very strong, sturdy, crush-resistant packaging. And what's cool is that they come with a little paperboard spoon. So you don't have to use your hands or fingers to just, chow down like a nutrition bar. Or so use one of their squeeze pouches, which are so not sanitary. You're carrying them in your backpack. They get dirty. They become disgusting. But the energy pods, you can eat them properly like a true gentleman and lady or whoever you are. You just pop open the lid and just enjoy the experience of the energy pods. And what's interesting is that we found out from our various events that, oh my God, 100% of the people who have tried the energy pods love them. We have some videos on YouTube and Instagram that testify to it. We had just random strangers at different events just try our product out, and they loved it. They thought they couldn't believe this was a health product. They just were blown away when we told them that there was literally no sugar added to these food products. Isn't that crazy? It is extremely crazy. The texture of the energy pods, if you've tried the pre-2021 version, it's a little bit on the coarse side, sort of like a grainy texture. But these new post-2021 energy pods are just a genre-defining new product. They're silky smooth. The particle size is under 20 microns, so you can feel the velvety, silky smooth texture that melts in your mouth. Well, actually, it doesn't really melt in your mouth. It kind of coats your mouth. That's the interesting thing about the energy pod texture, which makes it very, very unique. And it's extremely flavorful. It explodes in the mouth. And they're very mature and bold flavors, all the way from chocolate fudge to white chocolate strawberry to pecan coconut to our hallmark flavors, which are the breakfast mocha noir, made with straight up light roasted coffee beans and chocolate nova. Oh my god. That is hands down, I will say, the best version of chocolate you will ever try in your life. And I know that this is a very bold statement, but that is true. It is extremely, extremely tasty. People who have tried chocolate nova, they ain't going back to regular chocolate bars. And fun fact, energy pods are practically a meal replacement. So they're more than just, a tasty chocolate bar 10.0 version. So you gotta try them out. You have to. It's like taking a boutique Italian restaurant in a 2-ounce cup. That's how good they are. And how do you use them? Well, there are many uses for it. If you're a keto low-carb person, then you can definitely enjoy them as part of your diet. If you like to surprise your guests at a party, just open up a couple of energy pods, leave them on a table, and let your guests dig in. Maybe pair it with some wine and see how that goes out. Now, if you're into functional fitness and outdoor lifestyle, this is your jam. Only figuratively, not literally. This is your energy pod. That's better. So these can be taken anywhere. They're completely shelf stable. You can refrigerate them and they'll turn into an awesome, really, really good texture. But you don't have to. You can go to the Saharas. You can go to Mount Everest. You could go to Death Valley, which I won't recommend. You could go to Yosemite. You could go to the Yellowstone Park. Anywhere you want. And these will be your best friends. Just toss them into your backpack and go do your adventure. In fact, we recommend people do exactly that. Stop focusing so much on macros, micros, and all this processed information. Take a tasty food product and go on an adventure. Spend time with your loved ones. Life is short, and health is a diminishing asset, so make the most out of it. Now, there are some other interesting uses to the energy pods as well. For example, one of my favorite ways is to take a glass, sort of like a glass of some sort, or maybe a bowl. There you go. Bowl's better. Take a bowl, take the chocolate fudge energy pod or the chocolate nova, just drizzle it at the bottom and load it up with some parfait on top and then some crushed nuts. Now you have a tasty yogurt dessert. It's amazing. So yeah, there's so many different uses to the energy pods. They're a genre-defining, innovative food product, and the Chocolate Nova takes it to a whole new level with its technology as well. It comes with a magnetic disc at the bottom. So let's say if you're out somewhere and you just want to snap that energy pod onto a surface, just put a magnet on that surface and boom, more like snap, it will snap onto that surface. It's awesome. Now, the big question still remains. How do you get the energy pods? Very simple. Just go to www.ketogeek.com and order right now. I'll give you 2 seconds pause to order right now as well. Okay, I don't know if that was 2 seconds, but you could have paused. Come on, that's fair, right? And so these energy pods do come with a free 2 to 3 day shipping. You can also find them in your local stores if you're in Napa. They are in Board Garden, Jeffries General here in downtown Napa. They're in Calmart and Calistoga. They're also now in Hot Yoga Calistoga. Isn't that cool? We're getting into yoga studios, guys and gals. It's also in Sunshine Food Market in St. Helena. If you are in any of these places, please go buy the energy pods and support your local vendor. Interestingly enough, we're also in Coffee Factory Roasters, which is a coffee shop in Red Lodge, Montana. If you're going to the Yellowstone Park, you can stop there and grab some energy pods before your adventure. Now, what if you are a retailer, gym owner, or just want to have energy pods at your workplace? Well, as a retailer, you can just go to Fair and Tundra and look up Ketogeek, and you can find our products there along with this new point of purchase display that we have made specifically for retail. And it's really cool. It comes with an NFC chip, which your frontline workers or your customers can just scan and learn more about energy pods and even about health and nutrition. How cool is that? So, energy pods, go get them. Let's change the world with better processed foods for a better future. It starts with you. Go get them. Now, let's get back into some of the news that is relevant to Keto Geek. We will be in Feasted Forward on 14th August between 12 p.m. to 5 p.m. It's a nice little place in downtown Napa, close to Oxbow Market. If you're a local, you know what I'm talking about. But if you look it up, you'll find it there. Drop by, say hello. We're going to have a good time. Listen to some kick-ass reggae music and have a blast. So, I think that's basically what Keto Geek and Energy Pods is all about. And as more information comes my way and Corey's way, we will send it your way. So many ways. All right, corniness aside, let's talk about a little bit about our podcast today. So plastics. They're a huge topic of discussion in nutrition and everywhere. I know they're a big thing in the food world, but everywhere we have the talk about plastics being bad for you. What about the microplastics? What about the sustainability? What about the fact that they kill animals? You hear that all the time, don't you? Even we hear it at Keto Geek, despite the fact that we actually use plastic in our product. And then we were also in a dilemma when we were trying to look up different materials, like should we go glass instead of plastics, or should we stick with plastics? Should we go with metal? What is the sustainability? And all those different factors. Now, with this podcast, one of the most interesting concepts that you need to take away from here is that when we look at a material or any sort of product or even produce in your food industry, we need to look at the entire life cycle of that thing, all the way from the start to the end, and perhaps the influence of that product on other side industries, because even that can have a carbon footprint and add to the carbon cycle, right? So if we start looking at plastics using this sort of an approach, we start seeing a slightly different picture. And that's where everybody's mind starts blowing apart, including mine, when I first came across our guest. It's really fascinating. And this same principle I eventually want to apply towards nutrition as well, because we come across so many different food products and produce, and we just ignore the fact that nearly one third of our food in the food supply is just wasted. And now if you factor in the fact that there are certain items in your certain produce items that literally have your nutrients locked behind cell wall. So once you factor in food wastage and bioavailability, as I just explained, then what we're left off with is a huge wastage of nutrients, energy, and all of these things. Now, this is a little bit off topic, what I was talking about, but maybe in the future we can excavate this further. Now, let's get back to the topic of plastics. Now, before I get into the podcast, let me give you guys a little bit of an introduction on who our guest is. So Dr. Chris DeArmitt is a luminary in the fields of polymers, functional fillers, innovation, and environmental aspects of plastics. The Fortune 100 comes to him for breakthrough solutions to some really complex technical problems when it comes to chemistry, plastics, and all that kind of jazz. He is an award-winner speaker with innumerable publications and patents, in addition to the books Innovative Abyss and The Plastics Paradox. The Plastics Paradox is the first book to present the science which dispels the myth about plastics and the environment. His media appearances include CBS, 60 Minutes, BBC, and Sky News. So he's been there, done that. He's a pro at this. Dr. DeArmitt is fellow of the Institute of Materials, Minerals, and Mining, fellow of the Royal Society of Chemistry, and a chartered chemist. Guys and gals, prepare to have your minds blown.
So I got started because my kids came home from school one day. They were at elementary school and their teachers had told them that plastics take hundreds of years to degrade. And I knew that was just a flat out lie. And so I was incredibly angry. I'm paying a lot of property taxes for my kids to get educated at a good school, and they're being taught things which are just categorically untrue. And I was on 60 Minutes with Scott Pelley talking about polymer degradation in the body, how quickly plastics degrade, how we spend billions of dollars to put in stabilizers to protect plastics. And so I was angry at the teachers, and then I realized, well, they're just regular people, right? They're getting their information from the internet and so forth, like everyone else. How are they supposed to know any better? So I didn't really mean to go on a crusade. I just started going and checking the science and showing it to people, and it just grew all out of control. So I ended up, because if you only talk about polymer degradation, somebody will say, okay, I get that plastics degrade, a plastic bag degrades outdoors in a year, right? I get that. And I'll say, well, what about litter? And my answer was, well, I'm a scientist. I don't know about litter. I'm not a litter scientist, right? So then you have to go and read 200 articles on that. And they'll say, okay, I get the litter argument. What about waste? And I'm like, well, I don't know about that. Let me go and read 200 articles on that. And microplastics, let me go and read 500 articles on that. And so nobody else, because they're not as stupid as me, nobody else has been so foolhardy as to spend thousands of hours reading thousands of scientific papers that cover all the area. And so that's how I got started. And that's how I'm on this crazy quest to have people start making rational decisions based on things which are actually true.
You mentioned something really interesting, the degradation of plastics in the body. Can you elaborate a little bit on what the misconception here is and what's going on?
Yeah, so in that case, people would assume that I would always be pro-plastics, right? But that's not the case. I'm a real scientist, which means I'm pro-truth, and then you can make up your mind based on facts. So that case was about some companies that have this hernia or vaginal mesh, which is, repair mesh that goes inside your body. And that is a material which isn't properly stabilized for use in the body. So the body attacks it and just degrades the heck out of it. And that leads to problems. So that's what that was about. And that's why I was on 60 Minutes. There was a huge class action lawsuit. We got settlements for thousands of women by showing that the plastic was just not suitable and degraded really rapidly. That was a major part of the case. And that's well known. I mean, there's a whole journal been devoted to polymer degradation for decades, right? There's literally thousands and thousands of articles. They spend $5 billion a year on stabilizers for plastics precisely because they fall apart so easily.
Okay. And do they do like modern plastics, or are there anything right now that we need to be sort of concerned about, or is most of the stuff safe, or what kind of vetting happens before it gets to the consumer?
Yeah, that's a great question. So people assume, I guess, because plastics are relatively new, that, this is some kind of cowboy area and people are just making anything they want to. And that's, couldn't be further from the truth. I asked one company, how many regulations do you have to comply with? And I said, add up the number of pages. And it was in the tens of thousands of pages, wow, right, of making a plastic product. What's in the plastic? What are the additives? How much are they? Are they FDA approved? Do they migrate out of the plastic? How long do they last? What do they degrade into? I mean, all of these things have been studied for decades, and everything is just regulated to an extent that it's even hard to keep up with the regulations, just in terms of reading them. So this is something which is continually evolving, and people are on this. So nothing's 100% safe as soon as you walk out of your door. A plane could fall out of the sky and kill you, but this is a responsible industry which is complying with a bunch of regulations and making sure everything's as safe as it can be.
So let's run down a practical scenario. For example, if I am a plastic manufacturer, like what kind of hoops do I need to go through? Like I come up with a new interesting polymer that I think has some functional use in the human body or outside of the human body, maybe in the food industry. Like what do I have to do to make this into the supply chain of human beings?
Right. Well, to be totally frank, people have almost given up on new polymers, right? Because it's so much work to get them approved, and they don't outcompete. They're not greener. They don't outcompete, and they're more expensive than the plastics we have now. So people have pretty much given up, even decades ago, on making truly new polymers and expecting to get them commercialized and to get real commercial volume. People are always tinkering in labs. But it was said by Professor Jim Feast when I was a student or a newly graduated polymer scientist in 30 years ago, that there would be no major new commercial polymers, and he's been pretty much right. These are things which have been around for decades, and they're scaled up and they're unbeatable, and so there's no real need to do that, and the regulatory stuff would just be too oppressive to even bother.
Your 20-minute video that I watched before I was got really excited. I'm going to post it into the link. Wow, it blew my mind away.
Thank you.
You probably noticed my excitement when I had those caps in my emails, just sending it to you. I did. So let's take that, and maybe there's something more to it. What are some common misconceptions that people come across, and some critiques that you come across that are either confusing or misled or just rumors?
Yeah. So almost everything that the public believes now has been fed by an online narrative, right? Nobody of the public has a PhD in polymer science and 30 years of experience and have read the science. Nobody, right? There would be less than 0.1% of your audience will have actually read hundreds of articles on this, which I have done. And so pretty much everything that people believe now is just wrong. So if you look at plastics, for example, we use too much material, right? Overall, we're saying we're drowning in plastics. We're using too much plastics, right? But let's zoom back, right? We're too focused in on only plastic. Let's zoom back and say, right, how much material do we use? And how much of that is plastics, right? We do have a materials usage problem, right? We're using a vast amount of material. But it turns out plastics is only 0.5% of the total material we use. And that blew my mind, right? I was reading a book. I turned over the page, saw this pie chart, and nearly fell off my chair, like the cliche. Oh my God, everyone's obsessing about less than 1% of a problem and completely ignoring the 99%. So my problem is everyone's always on about, let's increase the visibility of plastics. And it's completely the other way around, right? Everybody knows that plastics is a problem and everyone's ignoring the 99.5% of other materials. And, as a professional problem solver, there's no way you can solve a problem by ignoring 99.5% of it. That's just, you'd have to be clinically insane to think that you could solve a problem while ignoring almost all of it. And that's what people are doing now. They're obsessing over plastics and completely ignoring everything else. Okay.
So I'm looking over here on some of the slides that you had in your presentation. One of the most interesting one is plastic is greener than glass, steel, and aluminum, and even paper. How does that even work?
Right. So the only way to know what's green is to do a thing called a life cycle analysis, where you add up all of the carbon dioxide that's created, all the energy used, all the water used, all the pollution, all of those things, and you add them all up and you come up with several factors. And you say, right, of these 7 or 8 factors, which one's creating the least harm, right? Because we've got 2 choices: live in a cave and try and not have our modern lifestyle, or we have to continue with the nice life we have now and try and minimize our harm. And the way you do that is look at a life cycle analysis, and for every item, pick the one that causes least harm, right? So there's no perfect solution. Everything causes some harm. And when you look at these life cycle analyses, I wouldn't believe any one life cycle analysis, because there's always a temptation for people to mess around with it, and get a biased result. So in the case of bags, I went and found 27 life cycle analyses. That's everyone ever published in the world, right? Because I'm a real scientist who's not cherry picking stuff. I go and find all the data there is, and then I make up my mind. And if you look at those 27 LCAs, and I had them sent to an expert who's a professional, and he said, yes, they're all correct. They're all done properly. And every single one says the plastic bag is greenest. The plastic bag weighs 5 grams. The paper bag weighs 60 grams. So that's 10 times more litter, 10 times more material, more carbon dioxide, more water used, more pollution if you go to the paper bag or any other bag. So all I'm asking is that plastic doesn't always win. But wood can beat plastic in some applications. If you look at wood decking outside, wood wins that. If you go plastic decking, wood decking, the wood wins. It has a lower impact than the plastic does. But for most things, plastic wins. It always seems to win against glass, always seems to win against metal. Against paper, it's kind of close. Usually plastic wins, but not every single time.
So one of the interesting things that I wanted to discuss a little bit more on was the application of plastics in the food industry. That's a very controversial over here. And even I have many blind spots here. And so there are different kinds of plastics out there: polyethylene, polypropylene, and all of those kind of things. You're like God tier. You're like, this guy barely knows anything. So can we talk about these plastics in the food industry and whether they're safe and how, anything that we need to know as consumers?
Sure. The first thing to say about plastics is that they're giant molecules, right? Like DNA. DNA is a polymer, right? A plastic. So is collagen. So is all the proteins and enzymes in your body, right? So these are big molecules, just like those. And the thing about those big molecules is they can't really move. So let's say you have a sheet of polyethylene and you're worried, is this polymer chain, is this polyethylene molecule going to get into my, body or something? It can't, right? It's just too big to move. They're in there like a giant plate of spaghetti and they're all tangled together. So that if you go to the FDA regulations on food additives, right, you'll find that there's an exemption for plastics. Plastics are basically, as a group, considered so safe because the molecules are so big and they can't move around and cause a problem. So they're intrinsically safer than a lot of other materials. The only thing you really have to worry about, and they have been tested for decades and decades, right? I mean, everything you can imagine. The only thing you would have to worry about is any kind of additive in the plastic that could potentially come out of the plastic and get into your food or your body or whatever. So if you look at, you mentioned PE, PP and PET, right? The amount of additives in those plastics are usually about 100 part per million, something like that, right? So 0.01 weight% of the plastic might be additives, right? And of those are FDA approved. They've been tested for decades, and we know like whether they stay in the plastic, how much will leach out, what do they become? All of that stuff's been done years and years ago. So these are approved materials which are in many cases safer than the alternatives.
The story of the BPA is something that you hear a lot of the times. What's going on over there?
That's an interesting one. So BPA is, first of all, it's important to know that it's not in most plastics, right? Polycarbonate is a plastic that's made with some BPA and epoxy resins. So that's about, if you add it up, it's like over 90% of plastics have no BPA, right? So you can just eliminate those. And for the plastics that do have it in small amounts, I don't know if it was ever really proven to be in dangerous amounts. I'd have to double check that, but it is something that's been on the radar. And basically people took those plastics like the polycarbonate and just replaced them with other plastics like PET. Unfortunately, what they didn't do is test to see whether the replacement was safer than what they were replacing, right? So this was done again on this knee-jerk reaction. We're worried about something. We're not sure if it's dangerous, and let's go ahead and replace it. But they never went ahead and did the testing on the replacement material, which is what they should have done to prove that was safer than the original material. So that's another example of where you want to check the facts before running to a decision. Okay.
So in the food system, generally speaking, the plastics we use are very safe, just to sort of double down on this. Okay.
Yes.
So what happens inside the body? Let's say if you ingest a certain, perhaps food safe plastic, or maybe something else, like something that has potential to cause harm. I don't know. So what happens inside the body with these plastics? I know it's a very general question, but I'm just trying to sort of figure out from a very consumer perspective.
Yeah. So basically it goes right through you and nothing happens. If you take polyethylene, polypropylene, PET, any of the common plastics we use now, you could, if you wanted to, you could eat some of it and it would go right through you, and that would be that. And those studies have been done. So there's a lot of work done on microplastics right now because that's a hot topic. So I found studies where they took microplastic and they loaded it with poison, took toxins and soaked it into the plastic, the microplastic, and then they had fish eat it, and the poison stayed in the plastic, right?
What?
So
wow.
Yeah, because it's oily, like dissolves like. So if you've got a toxin and it likes to be in the plastic, it'll just stay in the plastic. Your body's made mostly of water, right? It doesn't want to be in the water phase, so it stays in the plastic. So the net effect of this plastic is to soak up toxins from the oceans and protect the fish from it, right? Because the fish are swimming in this toxic water, right? And the microplastics suck it up. And even if the fish were to eat that plastic, the poison stays inside the plastic and the fish is unharmed. And that's a scientific peer-reviewed paper that shows that. And this is something that people get completely wrong. What they say is, whoa, plastics are concentrating toxins. You're like, well, let's zoom out again, right? And ask, where did those toxins come from? The toxins are in the water the fish are swimming in, right? These toxins didn't come from nowhere. So the plastic is taking those toxins from the sea, which chemicals and all kinds of things from oil spills, soaking them up and then taking them out of the water, so the fish are now swimming in cleaner water. So you always have to, instead of focusing in on the plastic and trying to demonize the plastic, look at the total picture, right? The exposure of those fish to total toxins now is less because of the plastic. I'm not saying we should dump plastic in the ocean to soak up toxins, but I am saying that that's the net effect of what's happening.
Now, we can venture a segue into a very interesting question, which is the animals and the whole plastic thing. Like you see a lot of the times on either the TV or in some sort of a documentary where there's plastics being found in the birds and all those kind of things. And you had some information slides on turtles and birds as well. So could you elaborate a little bit on that aspect of plastics and animal damage, if at all?
Yeah. So that's another area, right, where I didn't know about it, right? All I was seeing is the same stuff that you see on the internet. You know, plastics are harming birds and whales and turtles, and I didn't know if it was true. So I just go to Google, right? And Google's not a source of information, but it's a way of finding the scientific studies, right? So people get this wrong. So I'll go to Google and I'll say, and you can do this too, bird mortality study, right? That's studies on bird deaths. So I'm not cherry picking anything. I'm not looking for anything that's helping plastics or against plastics. All I'm saying is, what do we know kills birds, right? So when you look at those studies, which you saw in my video, and they're peer reviewed and they're referenced, and they look at hundreds of millions of deaths, right? And what we find is that what you see online is that birds are killed by plastics and these wind turbines, right? And what you find when you actually read the scientific studies is you find that 500 million cats a year are killed in America, birds a year are killed in America by cats, right? So if you were actually, and the word plastic doesn't appear anywhere in the study. You can look at bird mortality, whale mortality, or turtle mortality, and you won't see a single mention of the word plastic or bag anywhere in any of those studies, right? Never been recorded as an actual source of death. What you find is that if you want to preserve birds and protect birds, you should put a bell on your cat or don't buy a cat, right? So and if you come to the wind turbines, which gets a lot of potential, a lot of press, that's hardly anywhere. You've got it like graph with bars like this big, huge bars, and the wind turbines is like not 500 million, it's like 30,000 bird deaths, So again, if you're concerned about something, the best thing to do, how to spend your time and how to spend your money, is to go and find out where's the biggest impact I can make, right? Is it focusing on the 0.5% or is it focusing on the 99.5%? And, an intelligent person with a certain budget or a certain number of hours in the day would try to, focus on the majority of the problem instead of focusing on some minutiae.
Yeah, and this brings us to the next question as well, which I think is interesting too. For example, you're a 30-year-old mom or a dad and you're working full-time and you don't have a lot of time in your day. Sometimes you come across 5 of your friends that are posting on social media saying, hey, plastics caused my kid to have something, or if you look at these plastics, these are bad for you. They'll just have these, eat from this meal away, or only consume these kind of materials. So in light of all of this, sometimes you start to doubt yourself, even if you are sort of like very scientific. Well, most people are not super scientific, but you know what I'm saying here. So how do these people want to navigate the waters?
Yeah. So what I have on my website, and I've got to emphasize, right, I spent thousands of hours unpaid to do this, to remain impartial, right? So this is unpaid. My website is paid with my own money. This is not even my job, right? I don't make income from this. I'm only doing this as a public service announcement. And what I do is every time there's some sort of weird thing on the internet, like we found microplastics in blood, right? I go and check the science and I write it up in a way that regular people can understand. And I got 40,000 hits on a post on LinkedIn because I was the only scientist who actually told people, should we be concerned about microplastics in blood? What did they really find? How scary is it? What's the science say? Is this even news? Right? So all of that's on the website. You can click on, was there a turtle with a straw up its nose? And you'll find out that there is no evidence that there ever was a turtle with a straw up its nose. They never measured to see if it was plastic. And when I wrote to the authors, they said, no, we've got no proof it was a straw. It could have been anything. Right? So we got 300 million people think that there was a turtle with a straw up its nose because that's how many views there are of that YouTube video, right? And it's complete fiction. There's no evidence for it. So every one of these common myths that you see online, you can just go to the FAQ on my website and read, what the science is. And there's links where you can literally click and check the science yourself and see that it's true.
And the link will be in the description in case anybody is interested in all of this, which begs the question, where did all of this scaremongering and fear start? Because polymers and plastics, correct me if I'm wrong, they were one of the best discoveries in the, I would say, 19th or 20th century. I don't know where the story begins. You're welcome to share it. So what's the timeline of events here?
Well, if you look at, how do I put this? Basically, no one's doing more harm to the environment than the NGOs who are claiming to be environmentalists, right? If you look at the advice that they give, 100% of it seems to be wrong, right? So if you go to the World Wildlife Fund's website, it says plastics take 450 years to degrade, but they don't give any evidence for that. And there is no evidence. There's never been a scientific paper in the history of the world that said that, right? Somebody just made it up and repeated it, presumably to get donations. And even if you write to them, and even if you write to them and say, here's 20 articles proving that's wrong, they don't update it. Presumably, I mean, I can't tell their motives, but presumably it's just too lucrative for them, right? And if you look at Greenpeace, for example, they had one doctor there, Dr. Patrick Moore, who was the president, and he left in disgust because he said they were just after people's money and they completely abandoned science and the environment decades ago. So he's now written 2 books saying that, and these are his words, not mine, right? They're just making stuff up to get your money. And there's no easier way to get people's money than to show a picture of a turtle or a whale or a bird or something like that. So as far as I can work out, everything they're telling us to do, they're telling us to get rid of plastic bags and go to paper, which we know harms the environment with 100% certainty. That's increasing harm. They're telling us plastics don't degrade when they do, and the list goes on and on. If you look at every single thing they've told us to do, not one of them actually stacks up to scrutiny. So I think that's the problem, right? They've got hundreds of millions of dollars and giant media budgets, where of course I have zero. So it just seems to be a big con job as far as I can work out.
But it would be interesting to know that, just to sort of go on like a constructive approach here, like when were plastics first discovered and how have they evolved over time? And so that would be a fun story.
They took off in maybe the 50s, something like that. They were, the major like polyethylene and polypropylene started to become popular. And I think one thing that people saw was that, of course, they grew from zero, right? We had no plastics at some point in time, right? Whereas we're used to metal and wood and stone, right? We've had the Stone Age, that was a long time ago. So we're used to those as humans, right? And what we've seen in the past decades is this exponential growth of plastics. And of course, the growth rate has been huge because whenever you start from zero, your first year of growth is infinity, right? There is infinite growth when you go from zero to anything. So we've seen this increase in the growth of plastics. And I think that's given people this misconception that plastics are taken over, when in fact they're only 0.5% of materials and waste. And what's even more interesting is if you study what goes into a landfill, scientists have proven that plastics have massively reduced the amount of material that goes into landfill. So rather than increasing waste, the net effect of plastics has been to massively decrease waste.
Wait, so how do plastics decrease weight? Waste, not
Well, it's
weight.
easy. You can check this in your kitchen, right? Go and weigh a paper bag, 60 grams from Kroger, right? And then go and weigh the plastic bag. It's 6 grams, less than 6 grams. Go and weigh a paper straw, 2 grams. Go and weigh a plastic straw, 1 gram. And you can do this with many, many, many things. And what you find is that plastics are just weigh a heck of a lot less when you make things out of plastics. And so you end up with this giant reduction in overall materials usage because you're replacing. If you take 1 kilogram or 1 pound of plastic, it takes 3 or 4 times more weight of other material to replace that 1 pound or 1 kilo of plastic.
What about recyclability and compostability or renewable uses of these materials? Like we talked about the life cycle of the entire thing. So how do these factors play in?
Yeah, so the one weak point of plastics, if you look at a life cycle analysis, they win almost every category, right? They're causing less damage than the other materials. For containers, for straws, for bags, all of those, it's clear. The only downside seems to be the current recycling rate is low, right? And there's a theory going around on the internet that it's some great scam, right? The plastics industry told us that they could recycle these things and it was a scam, they lied to us. But that's not what happened. Plastics can easily be recycled, right? You just melt them and make a new part. You could do it almost in your kitchen. It's that easy to remelt something and just mold it into a new shape. What went wrong is that it's very hard to make money recycling plastics. And it's for a fundamental reason. So, and this will blow your mind, right? Because if there was money to be made, people would be doing it, right? That's how the world works, right? If you could make billions of dollars by recycling plastics, everyone would be doing it, right? But what happens is you start up a factory, you start doing it, then the price of plastic varies and you go out of business because you can't make money recycling anymore. And the reason for that is this. And I only found this out reading a book, right? The worst materials in the world for the environment are palladium, platinum, and gold, right? They're just disastrous for the environment. The amount of CO2 and energy and water and pollution is insane. And what else do we know about palladium, platinum, and gold, right? They're the most expensive things in the world too, right? Because of the same reasons, because of all the pollution, because of all the water needed, because of all of the transportation and energy used, right? So the same things that make something bad for the environment are the same things to the large extent that make them expensive, right? And on the other end of that seesaw, we've got things which are very, very green because they take less energy and less water and create less pollution and so forth. And those things are also very, very cheap, like polyethylene. So you've got on the one scale expensive bad things, and on the other scale, you've got cheap good things. And the problem with plastics is they're so green and they're so cheap that it doesn't make sense to recycle them in economic terms. And that's the problem. That's a fundamental problem, right? Because so people always talk about, hey, let's use aluminum, right? Because we've got all this embodied energy. We've put so much energy into making this aluminum. We have to recycle it. And you're right, you do have to recycle it because you melted it at like thousands of degrees. And glass is, you have to heat it to huge temperatures and put in a lot of energy. But the solution is not to pick materials which are worse for the environment and recycle them just because the economics is there. The solution is to take the greenest materials, which cause least damage, and increase the recycling rate. That's the only thing a logical person would do. And that's what we're doing now, right? There's a huge programs all around the world to do just that.
Interesting. So during the life cycle of plastics, so there's this weakness. What are the remaining strengths that it has over other materials?
Less weight, less carbon dioxide created, less energy used, less litter created, better recyclability in some cases. So almost all of the things you can look at in a life cycle analysis turn out to be beneficial for plastics relative to other materials.
So hypothetically, plastic seems to be one of the best things humanity has ever created or discovered.
It is.
It's crazy. I'm still trying to parse it out. Like, why do we still hate it? I'm trying to actively falsify this whole notion. Like, what are these people talking about? What are they bringing up here?
Well, there could be other reasons, right? If you think about like the new kid on the block, let's pick on the new guy in town. And we've had stone and metal and glass and things for so many millennia in some cases, right? And pots and ceramics. These are things which we're used to. And when we see a piece of plastic, it looks synthetic. It looks ugly, right? And I think we have a deep maybe reaction and we have a kind of discrimination against plastic. And the problem with that is that it's a lot of fun to demonize plastic and people love doing it and they feel so virtuous to say, I hate plastics. But the problem is when you do that, you end up harming the environment, right? So let's say I find plastic bags to be hideous, right? If there's one in the kitchen, the whole kitchen's a mess, right? It's just awful to look at on a deep level, right? And they've done scientific studies on that. When you see things which look synthetic, we react badly to it. We assume that they're evil because they look bad. And so I think there might be some of that going on. I think that made it easy for these NGOs to demonize plastics because there is a visceral reaction to synthetic things.
So just to pry this further back, like why do you think people have an aversion to the synthetic versus just something that has more a traditional approach? To be honest, if you think about it, when we buy a fruit that is clean and pure, and to be honest, that's anything but natural in many cases. Right. But in this case, when you find something that is clean and pure, like I personally can see a lot of beauty in plastics, the malleability, the colors, the way you can fabricate things at such a good, and from an engineering perspective, it's so beautiful in itself. But why do people still stick to the traditions here? It's so crazy.
Yeah. Well, some things aren't logical, are they? Some things are just deep-seated within you. One thing that is amazing about plastics, and I found this out, that, we all know that when you make a car lighter, you get better miles per gallon, right? And you save oil, right? That's something that everybody knows. Even my kids get that. And so if you calculate how much lighter are cars today because of plastics, because there's a vast amount of a car now is plastic. I don't know if it's 40% of the car or it's a large number, right? And the same with airplanes, same with ships. Well, not so much with ships, but same with trains and trucks and so forth, right? We're using a lot more plastic. So if you take that weight reduction due to the plastic, and you calculate how much oil was saved, right, by increasing the miles per gallon of the car, it turns out that 5% of oil is used to make plastics, but you save more than that 5% because you made the car so much lighter, right? So the net effect of making plastics is to reduce oil consumption, and that's a mathematical certainty, right? I've had 5 experts check that calculation. Because you're saving weight, you're also insulating homes, and you're also preserving food. So there's a lot of CO2 and fossil fuel reduction from the use of plastics. And people are so blind to this. They're like, we can't use plastics because they're made of oil. I'm like, well, that's not the whole story, right? If you look at a life cycle analysis, only 10% of the total impact is what goes into making the material. The rest of it is the impact of the material when you're using it, right? So, and this would be an equivalent, because I always like to think of analogies. Imagine I said to you, give me $10 and I'll give you back 100, right? And you'd say, no. I'm not giving you $10. That's going to cost me $10. I'm like, no. I'm going to give you back $100. No. And then you said, no, it's costing me $10. And this is the same exact thing the public's doing with plastics. They're saying we can't use any oil to make plastics because we need to preserve our oil, right? And yet you're getting back more oil than you used to make the plastic in the first place. And nobody seems to be aware of that. Even the plastics companies aren't aware of it.
What's interesting, I think you bring a very interesting point over here that what consumers see is a front-end visualization based on a very distorted image that is propagated by certain advocates, certain activists, and even some aspects of the media. What they don't get to see is the back-end cycle that's happening from the start to finish and then going back the whole circle. So I think that's a huge sort of disconnect that needs to be highlighted. But what also I want to ask over here is that we've talked about the automotive industry, so it's a net benefit here. What other industries in humanity were really revolutionized by the advent of plastics?
Well, the medical industry, although I make it my job never to go out expounding about the benefits of plastics because I find it so cheap and so unnecessary. We know what plastics are good for. It would feel wrong for me as a scientist to do that. But you're asking me a question. So, a lot of medical equipment has been revolutionized by having plastics, the transportation industry. If every piece of wire that we have is insulated with plastic, so people are like, get rid of plastic. You're like, really? You don't want electricity to your home? You don't want a cell phone, you don't want a computer, you don't want a pacemaker. I mean, you don't want a defibrillator. How many things? You don't want a car, right? These people are out of their minds, right? They haven't got one inkling of what their life would be like if they had no plastic. They'd be living in a cave, eating off of, eating berries. You need to not just go around demanding the demise of something because, it has an impact, but look at the big picture. And that's why I've distilled all of this down for people. You can literally in 3 minutes read on the website, the impact on all these things and the proof to back it up, because regular people don't have time to look at the facts. But what I have found is most people actually don't care about the environment. They don't give two hoots about it because they can't find 3 minutes to actually look at the science. They're so busy out there in their crusade trying to look good for their friends online that they haven't got 3 minutes to go and look at the evidence and actually do what's good instead of everyone's trying to look good instead of be good. That's the problem.
That is so true. You literally hit the heart of what we are. We've lost our appreciation as collective human civilization for innovation and solving problems. Instead, we're far more focused on superficiality and basic, latent, and very primitive survival and sort of hedonic pleasures. When it is these great innovations that brought us these comforts and these same hedonic pleasures that we have in our society at this moment. But that's really fascinating. What are some aspects in the realm of plastics and research that really interest you?
There are always innovations, right? My actual job is not this, as I said, it's to help people make better plastics, to solve problems and so forth. And that's why I know you can't solve problems without the data, right? So I always go and find all the data and make sure I understand the problem, and that's what's driving me nuts with this environmental stuff, right? Everyone's increasing harm to the environment because they didn't go and check the facts before they went off on their passionate quest, right? So things that plastics are doing, which are new, there's always innovations, there's always new additives, there's minerals that go into plastics. For example, I've just commercialized with a company, there's a special type of calcium carbonate that comes right out of the ocean, and it contains 40% newly trapped carbon dioxide, and you can put that into plastic to make it, even more sustainable, because now you're trapping CO2 and using that as a replacement for some of this plastic. And so that's a product called Aquaflex, which I helped to commercialize last year. And then there's various other things as well. I helped to make a injection moldable PET, because PET is one of the greenest materials, but you couldn't mold parts out of it. People have failed to do that for decades. And I've patented a process or a new tweak where you can take that PET and now you can make greener products. You replace some other plastic with PET, which is much greener, and so, for example, Lego recently announced that they're planning to make Lego bricks out of PET instead of the plastic that they use now. So I'm working on some things like that.
Oh, that's really interesting. Why does PET gives that many problems? What's the chemical structure?
There's two things. It doesn't flow well, so you can't make thin parts with it. It takes too long to get it into the mold and really make a part, especially thin wall parts. A lot of things now are very, very thin, like a cell phone housing or whatever. So that's one thing. And the other one is it doesn't solidify in the mold fast enough. So put the melted plastic in your mold and you have to wait till it goes solid before you can open your mold again. And that's called the cycle time. And the cycle times for PET have been too long to be economical in the past. So I managed to solve both of those problems. I made a very high flow PET, which has a very fast cycle time. So you can make a lot of parts per minute.
I'm going to ask you a question that may not be the best question in the world. It's kind of like asking your favorite child, but what are your favorite plastics?
Yeah, the greenest ones, actually, PE, PP, and PET. You can make most things from those three. They're the greenest, they're the cheapest, they're the best if you look at the properties. And those are my favorite ones.
Why are these that you mentioned, at least the three of them, why are they used so commonly in the food industry? Is it because of the price range? Or one thing I've noticed, just to add a little bit of a side note, is that when we tried to add an adhesive to PPs, they don't stick easily. You have to find a very niche adhesive. While we were trying to work on our PP cup and attach some sort of a metal disc at the bottom, and we were raking our brains trying to find an adhesive that works. So why does the food industry like these so much?
Right. Well, that's the kind of problem I solve, right? People come to me and I can give you an additive or a way to solve that problem in minutes. Increasing adhesion to a plastic or something like that.
Why do you on speed dial?
Yeah. Well, the reason that people go for those is they're the cheapest, right? So I worked in the past for Electrolux Frigidaire, and I took the stiffness. So I made graphs, right? Stiffness of every plastic against cost, right? And polystyrene wins, for example, that. If you wanted a certain amount of stiffness at the lowest cost, polystyrene is unbeatable, right? If you want strength, then you might have another polymer. If you want density, if you want impact resistance, so it doesn't shatter when you break it. Basically, when you look at the cost performance benefit of all the different plastics, PE, PP, and PET, and some of the styrenics turn out to be the cheapest way to get you to a certain solution. And this is great for the public, right? And this is what the public haven't understood. Everyone's trying to get them to go from a plastic straw, which is incredibly cheap, to a paper straw that costs way more, or a bamboo straw, or a metal straw, or a glass straw that costs way more because it's less green, right? If you just go for the cheapest solution every time, you are almost always going to get the greenest solution too, right? Because the cheapest solution took less energy to make and less water to make and less transportation to get to you and so forth. So it turns out that all of this pro-green stuff is A, increasing harm to the environment because the things aren't green, and B, massively increasing our expenditure, right? And we're heading into a recession now with 15% real inflation rates. Who needs to be spending more money on something which is actually increasing harm when you could be buying something made out of polyethylene and saving money?
So considering how you probably get a lot of heat from people, I would imagine, because of your sort of, even though you're quite neutral and you try to use the scientific method, you probably get a lot of heat from the activists and all those kind of stuff. Is that true? And how do you handle that?
Well, the activists don't seem to care because they're making their money and that's their business. So they've got their hundreds of millions and I'm not really a threat to them. And in fact, a journalist recently spent months trying to find an activist who would argue with me and he couldn't find a single one because they don't have any evidence, right? I have all the evidence on my side because I've got science and truth on my side and all they've got is a bunch of fiction. So the activists haven't been an issue. I do get negative or at least in the beginning, I got negative responses from people because they've been brainwashed, right? If you've heard that plastics don't degrade 100 times and some geezer comes up and says, oh, well, that's not really true, right? That's a lot of cognitive dissonance, right? That's basically your brain has a conflict. And it's just so much easier to keep believing the fiction than it is to question your belief, look at the evidence and overcome it. And that's why I appreciate what you did, right? You're in the 1 or 2% of people who actually cares enough that if somebody says, please read this for 3 minutes or watch the 20-minute video, it's got the truth in it. Everything's backed by science, which you can check yourself. Only 1 or 2% of people actually do that. The rest of them are just out there virtue signaling, pretending to be good instead of being good.
So I'm still in a sort of like I'm still, I think, very brainwashed in this direction. Like I'm seeing trees being chopped down, then regenerative forestry of some sort where they've got like something going on over there, where they'll plant trees and they'll recycle paper and all that kind of stuff. That sounds so green, technically speaking, but you're telling me over here that plastics have a clear-cut advantage in many domains. I'm still trying to reconcile that. So could you sort of guide me on this, like what's going on over here and how do plastics in many cases still win? Am I missing something here or am I just cognitively blind?
So basically, the number one contributor is how much energy does it take to make something, right? So if you take glass, right, you melt it like 2,000 degrees, right? It's literally glowing red hot, right? Like the sun does, it's not the same temperature clearly, but it's glowing red hot. I mean, even a layperson, even my kid can look at it and go, geez, that's hot. How much energy was required, right? It's the same with steel, right? It's the same with aluminium, right? These things are heated up to incredibly high temperatures, which means we burned a lot of fossil fuel and gave off a lot of CO2 just to heat them and melt them, right? So it's as simple as that. On a first level basis, you can just understand anything you had to heat the heck out of to make or even to remelt it, right? That's the travesty of it. Every time you recycle glass, you put in that same heat again. Plastics melt at like 150 degrees, 200 degrees C, not thousands of degrees C. And that's the fundamental reason that they work out to be greener. That's one of the main contributing factors.
So what you would be saying is that the energy requirement creates its own ripple effect, which causes it to become a sort of like a less sustainable option when compared to plastics because they have such a low melting point, and the amount of strength and the physical properties and the chemical properties you get for that amount are far superior in that regards. So what else is in here that people like myself might be missing out on, or is it just primarily based on just this energy differential?
It's mainly the energy. I mean, there's water, as I mentioned, and pollution and all those other things. They're all in the life cycle analysis. But the main single one, if you were to just dumb it down, it's the amount of energy needed to make the material and transport the material is a big factor.
What about safety of plastic when it comes to food safe stuff, like compared to, let's say, metal or let's say wood or stone? For example, when we used granite grinders for a while, what we noticed that even there's a little bit of chipping going on with granite. So I just don't cognitively feel safe about that. Maybe I'm wrong about it. And same goes with metal. Could metal be sort of damaged and tarnished and cause some sort of damage? Like everything erodes over time. So are these things that I need to be worried about, especially with plastics?
They are things to be worried about and to think about. So you've come up with a great point, and this boggles my mind, right? Everyone's like, plastics are making microplastics, right? And you're like, yeah, like every solid material we use, as you just said, right, grinds up to be something smaller. Boulders become gravel, and gravel becomes sand, and sand becomes dust. And trees rot to make smaller pieces, and then they create, microplastics, micro dust particles of wood. And the same with metal, it grinds up, and the same with granite. So, and the funny thing with granite is, I mean, you grind that up, it's got quartz in it, and you die of cancer, right? So people are so obsessed by plastic, which if microplastics have been tested and proven to be safe, and it's 0.03% of dust is microplastic, right? It's like polyethylene that you could eat your food out of, and it's been tested and it's safe, right? So what else is in dust? 25% quartz that you breathe and get cancer and die, right? I mean, that's scientifically proven, right? So 25% of dust is quartz, which is proven to cause cancer and kill you, and nobody's talking about it. They would rather obsess over 0.03% of safe microplastics, right? And they're ignoring, as you said, there's metals also, form little particles. So you've got lead particles, which are really bad for you. They stunt your IQ and stuff like that. That's proven. You've got other heavy metals like mercury, that's in dust. You've got dead skin cells in huge quantities that nobody's talking about. So this is my issue with the demonization of plastics. Everyone's obsessing about this tiny, tiny fraction of something safe and completely ignoring proven risks.
And one more, just to add, what do you think about the whole wood and paper stuff? Does that also degrade and add into your, does that have some potential to harm somewhat?
Well, one thing that I didn't know until I made a post on LinkedIn and somebody said wood dust causes cancer. And I was like, you're kidding me. So I went and I searched online. I went to all the scientific places and I found, it's well known that wood dust causes cancer, right? And what is paper made of? Wood dust, right? It's made of wood fibers. So it amazes me again that if you look at what goes into a landfill, the amount of paper going in is double the amount of plastic, right? It's about 25%, plastic's around 12, 13 something, right? So, and that stuff degrades. Everyone's like, oh, it's paper and it degrades to little stuff and it's all nice and cozy and friendly, like a little furry animal, right? But it isn't. It's going to create wood dust particles, which are proven to cause cancer. So, it's another case where everyone's so blindsided into hating plastics that they can't actually take one step back, look at the big picture and say, hey, what should I really be concerned about?
Are there some areas in human history where plastics have actually caused some sort of harm? I think we talked a little bit earlier, but other than that, and where there was some genuine concern And how was it handled by the relevant authority?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I mean, if you look back, every material we've ever used has created problems for us, right? I mean, we had tin mines, right? And people died of that, right? Because we didn't realize tin was toxic. And we've had lead pipes, right? We had lead pipes for our water, and that turned out to be a bad idea. So we got rid of the lead pipes. We had lead in our gasoline. That turned out to be bad. We got rid of that. And we had the same thing with leaded glass. We had to get rid of the lead in glass. So there's glasses turned out to be toxic, right? And we had to reformulate it. So basically every material we've ever used has turned out to be toxic. We've realized it, and then we've made an adjustment. And it's the exact same thing with plastic. So some of the early plasticizers that went into PVC to make it soft, like rubber duckies and things like that, those came under scrutiny. And I don't know if they were ever really proven to be toxic, but there was enough evidence to at least take them off the market and say, hey, we can use alternatives. So that's been done, right? There's been some flame retardants, which turn out to be, which save lives, right? So they have a purpose. They're literally proven to save lives. But some of them turn out to be accumulating in the environment and not very good. So they took those off the market as well and replaced them with ones which are proven to be safe. So there's been many cases of that. It's continually proving, and that's where all these new regulations come from that I mentioned earlier.
What are some of the chemical, mechanical, or any sort of scientific properties of plastics that really blow out your mind and you're like, wow?
That's a tough one to answer, but
all of the
probably the biggest reason to use plastics, because if you so we've done these analyses in companies that I worked at before, and it turns out that plastic isn't always the cheapest solution. But what makes it so appealing is that you can take something that was made of 5 pieces of metal and screwed together and replace it with one molded part of plastic, right? So you skip the assembly, you skip all the screws and all the other stuff, and that's one of the major advantages, that you can make such great things with such a small amount of material that you can't do with anything else.
What are some of the latest technologies that are on the horizon? Personally, I've become a little bit of a fan of 3D printing, but that might be Stone Age for someone like you. So what are some things that really, really caught your attention and you think is where the plastic industry is heading towards?
Yeah. Well, I'm an innovator. So my first experience with 3D printing was with Stratasys, who's one of the market leaders. And in 2004, I developed new 3D printing materials with them. And I was working at BASF in the time, and I couldn't get anyone interested in it at BASF. They're like, what's this nonsense? No, we don't care. And now they have
what's
like a
BASF?
BASF is the world's biggest chemical company. So
I'm an idiot.
it's in Germany. It's like the Dow of Germany.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, no worries. They're in Ludwigshafen. They don't sell anything to the customer, so people haven't really heard of them. And they don't sell anything to like you and me, the end user. They're selling to other industries, so that's why people haven't always heard of them. Anyway, so I was working there, and I made new 3D printing materials, and but nobody was interested because I was too far ahead of my time. And probably the biggest single innovation, or what was the question again?
Like what kind of innovations that are exciting for you? I'm personally like a 3D printing stuff, but what about you?
So one of the most exciting ones is people are trying to make things greener, right? They're trying to take away all the oil feedstock, which is only 5%, but still they're trying to replace the amount of oil that we use to make plastic with something else. And so it turns out that you can make many of our favorite materials from plant-based feedstocks, right? You don't have to use oil. You can just grow plants, take out the oils you need, and then use that. So they're replacing, and this is commercial, right? This is not a dream. You can buy polyethylene that's based from corn, right? It's made from corn. And you can get polypropylene, and you can get some amount of PET, and you can get some nylons, which are partially made from these bio-sourced raw materials. So this is a great thing because, oil's not going to last forever. And at some point, we still need to be able to make materials not based on oil. And that's already proven and scaled up, and it works. And it's green too. So that's pretty exciting.
So are you talking, so what's this whole thing about these biodegradable biopolymers or something like that? I'm a newbie, so help me on this one.
Yeah, so it is confusing. So there are polymers which are bioplastics, so they're made from a bioresource. And then there's biodegradable polymers which degrade, but that's a terrible idea. I call it the Harry Potter solution, right? So if because, you drop your cloak on the ground and you expect it to become invisible like Harry Potter, right? This is the solution. Like, oh, I'm going to be a slobber. I'm going to drop my litter everywhere and it's going to degrade instantly, go poof, and this is the biodegradable mentality. Let's just be slobs. Let's drop stuff everywhere and hope that it just vanishes by magic. And that's not a good approach, because when you do a life cycle analysis, you find out that those materials are more expensive and worse for the environment than the plastics we use today. What comes out good in a life cycle analysis is a material that lasts forever, right? You would make it once, spend the energy once, and it would last forever. That would be the ultimate material. So having things which degrade is a terrible idea. They're less green to make, and when they degrade, they give off carbon dioxide, which is exactly what we're trying to avoid, right? Everyone's trying to stop global warming. Why would you make materials which are more expensive, worse for the environment, and give off carbon dioxide, which is what we're trying to prevent? What you need to do is take the greenest materials and make them last longer. That's what a life cycle analysis tells us.
That is a very fascinating way of looking at this, because you're basically letting go of materials that have a tangential energy leak in the life cycle where it's just going out of the system. But over here, you're trying to efficiently capitalize on a material that you can consistently recycle with the lowest amount of energy input and has one of the highest mechanical and chemical strengths depending on where you use it. That is a great way of looking at plastics. Is there anything over here that I've missed out on, topic-wise?
I think, let's just go through all the things in order. So first, there's materials use. We use too much materials. Plastics are 0.5% of it. And plastics are proven to reduce the amount of materials we use. Waste. Plastics are 0.5% of total waste, right? So we'll never solve that problem until we start looking at the other 99.5%. Then we look at litter, right? We know for a scientific fact that litter is caused by people. They literally do studies where they watch hundreds of thousands of people drop stuff on the ground on purpose. Over 80% of litter is dropped intentionally. So to turn around and blame the candy wrapper or the plastics manufacturer is insanity. If I drop my Levi's jeans on the floor, I don't expect a guy from Levi Strauss to come leaping out of the closet and pick them up and fold them up and put them away. That's what a 5-year-old does, right? And what we're hearing online is, we need extended producer responsibility. We need Procter & Gamble to fly out of the closet and clean up our shampoo bottle. I mean, this is an argument for 5-year-olds. We're adults. We buy products and we put them in the trash can or recycle them when we're finished with them. It's simple. It's moronic to say that the producer is responsible for something that I bought and disposed of improperly. That just doesn't make any sense to me as a scientist, or shouldn't make sense to any logical person, right? Then we look at this harm to animals, and everything's going to harm. I'm sure a coconut fell out of a tree some point and killed a polar bear, right? I mean, but they don't live in the same place, but killed a bird, let's say, right? Coconut fell out of a tree, killed a bird. I'm sure it's happened. We didn't ban coconuts because of it, right? Everything's causing harm, but we need to get a grip of, what's really going on. And when you look at the harm caused by plastics, it just doesn't even show up in the statistics. It's just not even there as a real threat. So, and then we look at degradation. As we just heard, you don't want things to degrade because they're worse for the environment and they give off CO2. So that's a bad idea. Plastics actually degrade too quickly, and there's scientists working around the clock to make them last longer because they degrade so rapidly. And that's proven. And then what's the last topic? And then the last topic is nobody's doing more harm than the NGOs, because they're just going around telling us whoppers to enrich themselves. And this was actually proven, right? So one CEO of because you mentioned trees, right? There was a company called Resolute, and the CEO got really annoyed because an NGO was just telling lies about them all the time. So he took them to court. And you know what Greenpeace's defense was in court?
Don't know.
They didn't show science. They didn't prove anything they said. They said that they had made non-verifiable statements of subjective opinion. That was their defense in court. Their defense in court was they just made the whole thing up. Right? So this gives you an idea and they were like persecuting this company for years and years and years and making claims and articles and everything. And, and when they were taken to court and said, "Where's your evidence?" "Oh, we don't have any."
That is crazy, man. This is so insane. Wow. I think we've basically knocked out an hour of mind-blowing content. This was fascinating. If you got anything else over here, we can talk about it. If not, we can start wrapping it up and go to the final plugs. We burned an hour.
Yeah, great. You've been really great with the questions. Those were really sharp questions. And I appreciate you being one of the few people who actually looked in, as I said. And anybody who read this 3-minute thing that you saw and then saw the video, they would know more than anyone else on the planet. And they would finally be able to make choices that help the environment instead of increasing harm. So I hope that a few people hear this and do that.
Well, my thing over here is that when I started this business, this food business, my goal was to help people above everything. I have another business as well that is the moneymaker and keeps me afloat. This one was me trying to create better foods and help people with their health and all that stuff. And one of the components that kept coming back to me was the packaging and plastics. And I wanted to make sure that I was very informed about what I'm doing with it, because I'm consuming the product myself as well and sharing it with my friends and family. And a lot of my friends and family are concerned about plastics. So in order to get better information, I came to someone like you. So that's been my journey here. So I think that's about it. We've knocked an hour. Wow. I'm probably going to bring you back, and I'm going to keep you on speed dial in case I have issues with plastics and get some work done there. But yeah, that's about it. How can people reach out to you, and what can they contribute?
Thanks so much. Yeah, please go to phantomplastics.com or plasticsparadox.com, where you can download my book for free. Again, the work was done for free. The books are free. The website's for free. The videos are free. Why? Because you can't make intelligent decisions based on fiction, which is exactly what people are doing now. If you know a politician, get them in touch with me, because they're making horrible policies that are 100% proven to increase harm. If you know a teacher who needs to be educated, please send them to the website so that we can start getting facts in front of people. All
right, Dr. Chris, thank you so much for being on the show, and we're going to call it
Thank you.
Here. Thank you for listening to our podcast. You can visit us at www.ketogeek.com to shop our products or subscribe to our newsletter so that you can stay in touch with all the latest and greatest information we have to offer. Don't forget to leave us a review for this show, as word of mouth is the best form of marketing we can get. Now let's change the world for the better together.